On this prequel episode, we're breaking down the Brokeback Mountain pole, learning about constructed language, and previewing The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit, podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. On this prequel episode, we have a few different topics. Let's just get right into it and talk about what our viewers/listeners thought about Brokeback Mountain, which wasn't much.
Yeah, there's not really much to go over here. We got very few votes. This was probably our worst turnout yet.
Yeah.
And it's not terribly surprising. I think this is probably one that a lot of people didn't know was based on a short story.
Yeah.
And unlike, say, Rear Window, Brokeback Mountain is not in the public domain.
Yeah.
So you couldn't just, look up a PDF and read
Right.
the story real quick. But the votes that we did get unanimously preferred the movie. So there you go.
Cool. Yeah, our episode did pretty well in general.
Yeah.
In terms of listens, so it's not like nobody listened to the episode, but yeah, I think it's just like you said. Nobody knew it was based on a story.
And in a way, I appreciate everyone's integrity of not voting if you haven't read and seen both.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, all right, let's move on to our Learning Things segment where we're talking about constructed language.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
All right. So within the framework of Lord of the Rings and the entire Middle Earth collection, I'll call it.
Canon.
Perhaps one of the things that I think Tolkien is most famous for is the creation of fictional languages.
Definitely. It's one of the things people always like to mention.
Yeah.
Is, did you know actually he was a linguist and blah, blah, blah.
It's one of the funnest fun facts.
One of the funnest fun facts about J.R.R. Tolkien.
But he is hardly the first person to do it. Mm-hmm. Constructing language actually has a long history in literature. Thomas More's Utopia, published in 1516, and Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, published in 1726, are two other notable examples that predate Tolkien. Mm-hmm. So he's just really well known for doing this. He didn't invent it.
No.
And in fact, something that I learned that I did not realize, his invented languages actually predate his fictional world and stories. He's quoted as saying, "The invention of languages is the foundation. The stories were made rather to provide a world for the languages than the reverse." So he made up languages, and then he was like, you know what? I want people to speak these languages.
I'm going to write a dope story.
Yeah, made up a world. Which is an interesting way to go about doing it.
Very interesting way to go about it. Especially to then go about creating one of the most deep and complete fantasy worlds ever created.
There was another quote that I don't have it in my notes, so I'll just give you the gist of it. I'll paraphrase it. That was about if you create a rich enough language, the mythology will follow, and then the world will follow. So,
okay, if he says so.
Everybody's got their own system, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, Tolkien had maybe one of the best possible backgrounds for this task. A couple facts about him. He studied Latin and Anglo-Saxon in his childhood.
Which I don't think that was super uncommon back then.
No,
study
not
Latin.
at all.
No.
Not at all. He studied the English language and literature in college. He worked for the Oxford English Dictionary after the First World War, mostly on word history and etymology. Mm-hmm. He taught at Oxford as a professor of Anglo-Saxon and then later as a Merton professor of English language and literature. He also did the definitive translations of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and Beowulf, among other slightly lesser well-known translations. And another interesting side note is that he was actually approached to potentially be a code breaker during World War II. He didn't end up doing that. They didn't need him. But he was on their short list.
Gotcha.
For somebody who knew enough about linguistics.
Yeah.
However, Tolkien's interest in constructed language actually goes back to his early teens when he discovered that his cousins, Mary and Marjorie Inselden, I think might be how it's pronounced, had invented a language called Animalic. So his kind of interest in it thought to date back to that kind of like childhood experience. And he actually later came up with a couple other languages, like along with his cousins, close to that time. So while around a dozen languages are mentioned throughout Lord of the Rings, Tolkien only fully developed 2 of them. Kenya, I think might be how it's pronounced, and Sindarin. So Kenya is like the Elvish Latin. So all of the other Elvish languages descend from that. And then Sindarin is the most spoken Elvish language throughout Tolkien's text.
When you see Elvish written, it's probably Sindarin.
Yeah, probably Sindarin.
Or a derivative of it.
Now, while the term constructed language kind of makes it sound like Tolkien built his languages from the ground up, that's actually not quite the case. He leaned a lot on the knowledge of languages that he already had, which, as we know, was extensive.
Yeah, and that's how most languages that are created for things these days, that's how it works. They don't just...
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I do think the term constructed language is maybe a little bit misleading. So I wanted to go into that. So he leaned on the knowledge that he already had. Kenya relies on the grammatical principles of Finnish, while Sindarin is based on Welsh. Then the language of Rohan is essentially a dressed-up cameo by Old English. And while a lot of other languages are mentioned, for example, Dwarvish, and then the Black Speech of Mordor, Tolkien only created like what he needed of those languages, like linguistic bits and pieces. He didn't fully flesh every single language out. So out of this, then, we get maybe one of the most esoteric debates within the literary/linguistic circles. Did Tolkien actually construct any languages? If you go by a somewhat liberal definition that he constructed some words and grammar structure, then yes, he absolutely did. If you go by stricter definitions, though, maybe not. Kenya and Sindarin are considered complete because Tolkien invented enough of them for them to be functional, but you can't translate any text into these languages because they lack niche vocabulary. And, you know, fair enough. Real languages are the way they are because they develop organically over time and hundreds of thousands upon thousands of speakers. And while Tolkien did revise and grow his languages, there's really only so much one dude can do, regardless of how obsessed he is. So while I mentioned earlier that Tolkien was hardly the first writer to construct languages to go along with his fictional world, he is one of the writers most known for it. And that has had a ripple effect throughout both the academic and the pop culture worlds. So we have, you know, fictional languages like Star Trek's Klingon, Avatar's Na'vi, and most notably, we have Game of Thrones' Dothraki and High Valyrian, which, knowing the extent to which author George R.R. Martin was influenced by Tolkien, arguably might not exist without Tolkien's initial work.
I think that's safe to say.
Which then kind of brings me to the academic side of things. You can take a whole-ass college course to learn Elvish as a foreign language. And that's, I think, been pretty common for a while. But thanks to that trailblazing, you have the same opportunities now with other more recent constructed languages. For example, in 2017, Berkeley gave Dothraki its own foreign language course. So this is really just dipping a toe into the water of this topic. Like I said, Tolkien was obsessed. So it's worth looking further into if this interests you, because really, no matter how you slice it, this is fascinating.
It really is. Cool. All right. Well, that was a little primer. I never know which way you're supposed to pronounce that. On constructed languages and the world of Middle-earth. Let's move on and talk about The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, the book.
The fate of the world will soon be decided. The dominion of evil grows even stronger. There is a union now between the two towers, Barad-dûr, fortress of the Dark Lord Sauron, and Orthanc, stronghold of the wizard Saruman.
All right, so The Two Towers is the second volume of Tolkien's high fantasy novel, The Lord of the Rings.
Again, we mentioned it before, but they're not actually three.
Yeah.
Not technically three. They're sold that way.
Yes.
But in his head, it is one tome, several.
Right. One tome made up of 6 books.
Yeah.
So this is volume 2. And it was initially published in 1954.
Mm-hmm.
This covers books 3 and 4 of that original 6-book vision that he had. About the title, Tolkien wrote, "The Two Towers gets as near as possible to finding a title to cover the widely divergent books 3 and 4 and can be left ambiguous." So it doesn't give too much away.
Yeah.
Now, Book 3, in case anybody's not familiar, Book 3 covers what Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli did following the events of Fellowship of the Ring, while Book 4 then catches up with Frodo and Sam on their quest to Mordor.
Yeah.
Now, early editions of The Two Towers were published without the 2 books' subtitles. The book that I got from the library, which is copyright 1965, doesn't have any subtitles. It's just Book 3 and Book 4. But Book 3 is titled The Treason of Isengard, and Book 4 is usually titled The Ring Goes East, but it has also been titled The Journey of the Ring Bearers.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. Much like Fellowship, Two Towers garnered a lot of praise upon publication. The New York Times gave it a positive review, calling it an extraordinary work, pure excitement, unencumbered narrative, moral warmth, barefaced rejoicing in beauty, but excitement most of all. Mm-hmm. However, some criticism was levied at Tolkien's style. For example, critic Anthony Boucher? I don't know. Boucher could be. He noted that The Two Towers makes inordinate demands upon the patience of its readers, with passages which could be lopped away without affecting form or content. He also said some positive stuff, but I thought that comment in particular was funny.
Having just finished the Treebeard chapter, I can agree.
All right, so that's all I have in the way of book facts.
Yep. Cool. All right, let's talk about Two Towers, the film.
The peril of the ring-bearer deepens. An unseen danger draws closer. For there is another who hunts the ring.
They stole my precious, and we want it.
Two Towers is the 2002 film. It's the second installment in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's all the same crew and actors and everybody, all that sort of thing. It was filmed, like we said last time, concurrently with the other movies. Some of the segments in it were shot before some of the stuff in Fellowships, most of it after. Just kind of depending on what they were shooting and where and when. But they filmed all 3 of the films in about a 2-year span, from like 2000 to 2002 or something like that. I have it in the last prequel. Some interesting things about this movie, though. Helm's Deep was the first structure that artist Alan Lee is an artist who does work in novels as well as like conceptual art for film. He's probably most known for his most notable works are several of J.R.R. Tolkien's novels, including collections of The Lord of the Rings, where he did novel art for them inside. He was tasked to design Helm's Deep when he signed on to the film. At 1/35th scale. It was one of the first miniatures built, and it was part of the 45-minute video that sold the project to New Line. I mentioned there was a video that they went when they were trying to shop it around when the Weinstein, whatever company, pulled out.
Yeah.
Miramax? I don't know. Whatever. And they went around and eventually sold it to New Line, and Helm's Deep was part of the thing that they sold it on. It's a pivotal part of the story, obviously. It was built at Dry Creek Quarry with a gate. It had the gate that you see in the movie, a ramp, and a wall with a removable section. I assume that's the part that gets blown away later on. And they had a tower on the second level. Most importantly, there was a 1/4 scale miniature of Helm's Deep that ran 50 feet wide, and it was used for forced perspective shots as well as when they blow up the wall. they blew up this little miniature 1/4 scale. Another random fact that everybody has heard about this movie is that Viggo Mortensen broke 2 of his toes when he kicked an orc helmet in the scene where they find the dead Uruk-hai and they think that the hobbits are dead. Merry and Pippin are also dead.
Wow, his boots weren't shit.
Yeah, well, it's a metal helmet and he's wearing, I assume, somewhat, like leather, like not particularly sturdy leather boots of some sort. He kicked the metal helmet and broke 2 of his toes, and that takes the one that's in the film, according to everybody. It wasn't the only injury on set. Orlando Bloom fell off his horse at one point and cracked 3 of his ribs. And John Rhys Davies didn't do most of the stuff in Rohan at the beginning of the movie. It was his stunt double because it's a shorter actor playing Gimli, whose name is Brett Beatty, and he dislocated his knee. And so there's several scenes where they're running, chasing, running through the distance, trying to track the orcs down, where they're like all 3 of the people are just like brutally injured in some way. So
that's fun stuff.
Yeah. The Rohirrim capital of Edoras took 6 months to build on Mount Sunday, which is, they actually built Edoras on a mountain in New Zealand. They had to do all kinds of stuff to preserve the natural habitat with like moving plants into greenhouses to like store them and then bringing them back and all this nonsense. But that was only for the exteriors, literally, because all the interiors were all shot in a studio. So like in the halls and all that were shot in studio, but the exterior shots you see were all shot on top of that Mount Sunday in New Zealand. On Miranda Otto's first day, which Miranda Otto plays Éowyn, first day of shooting, she showed up, and Liv Tyler was said to have welcomed her with enthusiastic open arms, saying, "I'm so glad there's another woman in this film."
Rip. I love these movies, but they do not.
Yeah.
Well, they don't pass the Bacadel test, that's for sure.
No.
No.
You're right.
Definitely not.
I was trying to think if there's a scene where Galadriel talks to, like, Arwen about, like, something interesting, but probably not. Okay. Brad Dourif, who plays Wormtongue, shaved off his eyebrows and used dried potato flakes as dandruff in his hair to make him look extra greasy and gross.
Gross.
Yep. The Battle of Helm's Deep filmed for, depending on the sources I found, anywhere between 3 to 4 months, which is pretty nuts. I think there was the big discussion about the Long Night episode of Game of Thrones, and I think that filmed something similar, like 2 months or something like that.
That sounds exhausting.
And all at night, obviously, because it all takes place at night, except for like the very end of it.
And like when I hear fun facts like that, like logically, I know that means that they filmed during the day and then like stopped and went to sleep. But when
they filmed at night and then stopped and went to sleep.
Whichever.
Yeah.
But like I hear that and my brain thinks that they just like filmed nonstop for 3 months for some reason.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm sure a lot of it, if it's raining now, we can't, it probably took 3 months, but who knows how many actual nights they filmed or that sort of thing. So we got a couple random other facts about Helm's Deep. They couldn't recruit enough men that were taller than 6 foot to play Uruk-hai in the movie, because they needed a bunch of extras to be Uruk-hai. So they had men, that were around 5 foot tall that were also cast, and they were affectionately nicknamed Uruk-lo, which I thought was funny, instead of Uruk-hai. The 10,000 Uruk-hai battle chants at Helm's Deep, where they all start screaming before the battle starts, they're doing like their battle chant. That was actually recorded at a 25,000 person cricket stadium full of people. Where they chanted the war chants. They had them spelled out on the big screen, and Peter Jackson was there, like, directing them to do it, which I thought was interesting. So the orcs have black blood throughout the movies that we see, and I assume that's described in the books. I don't remember that so far, but I'm sure
probably a mention of it.
And it was only natural, they assumed there, that the inside of their mouths wouldn't be pink, but would be black or something as well. And to do this, they had them swill around licorice-based mouthwash prior to the scenes. So they had to, not bleach, but dye their mouths black with licorice before they filmed their scenes. Helps them get into the character of just being like,
yeah, right,
angry. Weta Studios, who's the people who did all of the practical effects and all the effects works on the movies, they began animating and the CGI effects. They began animating Gollum in late 1998, so well before the movies ever started filming, to convince New Line that they could do it. Originally, Gollum was set to solely be a CG character, but when they cast Andy Serkis, when looking at his audition tape, Peter Jackson was so impressed that they decided to use him on set to actually come in and act. Because one of the things I read is that originally when he auditioned for the part, his agent, Andy Serkis' agent, was like, hey, do you want to do like 3 weeks of voice acting in New Zealand? And he's like, yeah, sure. And then, he ended up getting roped into being in all, a year and a half worth of the filming because he was in all of the scenes. And they filmed all of his scenes twice, one with Andy Serkis in playing Gollum, and then one without him, so they had a clean version to put Gollum into it. And speaking of Gollum's voice, Andy Serkis said that he based it on the sound of a cat coughing up a hairball, which makes sense because the Gollum, he has a thing in his throat.
Albus coughed up a hairball earlier.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, I can hear it.
You can hear it. It makes sense. Yeah. They also redesigned Gollum's character to look more like Andy Serkis. So the version you see in Fellowship of the Ring is slightly different than the version that is in the Two Towers, and because they hadn't cast Andy Serkis yet, from what it sounds like. And so when they or either they had cast him, but just to do the voice at that point, and then it was a little muddy from the several different things I found. But basically, once they decided that he was actually going to play Smeagol and be the live action version as well, they went back and they tweaked Gollum to look like more like Andy Serkis as Smeagol instead of just like sort of the whatever they had come up with originally. It wasn't too different, but it was just a little tweaks. So there's a moment in the Two Towers where Frodo and Sam end up in Osgiliath, and Sam has a line. He says, "By rights, we shouldn't even be here." The reason that line's in the movie, it was a nod to the fact that this is a pretty strong deviation from the book, because in the book they never get to Osgiliath. So that line of him, "By rights, we shouldn't even be here," is a reference to the book, the fact that they're never there in the book. A couple more interesting facts. Treebeard took between 28 and 48 hours per frame to render, which is straight up nutty, which animation is like that anyways, but it's an obscene amount. So here's a little bit of math for you. There are 28 frames roughly. I assume 24 frames roughly in a second of film. Assuming that's how they shot, because in later movie, like I know on like The Hobbit, Peter Jackson shot at 60 frames, so it could be, but generally speaking, in traditional film, 24 frames per second. So let's say 30 hours to render one frame. So 30 times 24, 1 second of Treebeard is what? I do have my phone. Hold on, I'll do it right here, real quick. Nope, don't play audio. 30 times 24. That's 720 hours. Oh, yeah, so it's 30 days. 30 days per 1 second, which seems nuts, but they used to render that stuff overnight while they weren't there, so it's pretty nuts. For scenes where he interacts with Merry and Pippin, a 14-foot tall puppet was built on a wheel to move around with him. And this, I did not know, John Rhys Davies provided the voice for Treebeard.
I didn't know
Gimli
that either.
provided the voice for Treebeard, and it apparently wasn't achieved by electronic distortion, but by just having the actor speak in his naturally booming voice at the lowest pitch possible through a wooden megaphone.
Oh, so we get that woody sound.
I guess. That's wild to me, and I did not know. I somehow missed that forever, that the Gimli was also Treebeard. So this film was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Art Direction, Best Editing, and Best Sound. And it won for Best Visual Effects and Best Sound Editing.
Nice.
But Return of the King is when it really, the awards really pick up. And it was the highest grossing film of 2002. It is adjusted for inflation, or since it came out, it's made pretty close to $1 billion. It's like 982 million or something like that so far.
Not bad.
Or I say so far, I don't know if that was over. So I just saw a $982 million number. That's not how much it made with the year it came out, but anyways, it was the highest grossing film that year. It makes it one of the highest grossing films of all time. So that was it for the fun facts about and the preview of Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. You can listen to our main episode exactly 1 week from today. Until that time, if you can do us a favor and rate and review us on all the major podcast providers that you can find us. So caveat it with that, because don't know where all we're available. And you can follow us on all of the social media, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, and Reddit. We have a subreddit. Just look us up. Yeah, that's all I need. Until next time, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else.
Keep reading books.
Keep watching movies.
And keep being
awesome.